And now this afternoon, the task of our group is to explicate the view, meditation, and action, which His Holiness so brilliantly talked about this morning. Although His Holiness did not follow the root text, showing his non-conformist Buddhist spirit. And instead, he gave us a brilliant thing incorporating people from all religious traditions, which I very much appreciate, actually. I think it's truly wonderful. And yet, in the end, he did view meditation action just like a rocket. So now it's up to our learned lamas and scholars and translators to fill in the gaps. And first of all, I think everyone, you have a program in which everyone is introduced to you, I believe. So I don't need to go around making introductions of everybody. So we don't need to waste time. And the first thing that we will then do is I will introduce my good friend Tsoknyi Rinpoche, who has promised to contextualize view, meditation, and action in terms of people's everyday lives, including today. So Rinpoche, please go ahead.
In Buddhist tradition, we talk about ground, path, fruition. Ground as Buddhist science, were thoroughly discussed, trying to understand the natural reality of the external phenomena and also natural reality of the biological phenomena and also the cognizant mind phenomena. So in order to experience the ground 100%, we have to depend on the path. The path here is Buddhist concept and theory and practice and Buddhist religion. So in order to summarize these three things together, we talk about view, meditation, and conduct. In order to experience basic reality of our ground, we have to depend on view, meditation, and conduct. So view is very important, as His Holiness mentioned this morning. There's a different kind of views. Without view, meditation is very difficult to practice. In Tibetan, we say, without view, meditation could be like walking with a blind eyes. And I think when I come to this country 16 years ago or 17 years ago, meditation was very popular. But I was investigated. Meditation come to this country through the kindness of our lineage guru from hippies. I was very moved, very happy. They brought concept of meditation, but I think they forgot about view. So many of my old friends now, they were happy, of course happy also, happy. But now they are upgraded meditators. So I have a lot of friends, they have with a great view and great meditation and great contact. So without view, meditation could be, I usually call, stupid meditation. You just dim yourself, trying to sink into your body, your subtle body, without any understanding of selflessness, loving kindness, compassion. And without that, you just simply close your eyes and trying to rest inside of you. I'm not sure where it's going to lead. So view is very important to see who is that practicing the meditation. As His Holiness mentioned about egolessness of I, no I, or is there's I, the I is permanent or not permanent, Without I, how I can function? And with I, the I is permanently exist within yourself or not? All this thoroughly understand and trying to understand. Then based on that conclusion, then you practice meditation. And meditation is also very important. Meditation here is cultivation of the view that if you have, once you have the view, then you again, through help of mindfulness and meditation, together with you hold the view. So here the view is this mineral water. Meditation is the holding the mineral water, and action used right way. So without view, you're just holding on something. I'm not sure what you're going to hold it. So it's very important to meditation on compassion, meditation on loving kindness, meditation on view of emptiness, meditation on selflessness. So all this, I think, is very important. So once you have the view, but without meditation, also a big problem. I have an experience. After I finished my study, sort of study in India, so I came to Nepal. When I was in the monastery food is not so good. So I came to Nepal. Then I eat, I think, quite good food. One day, one of my friends, student, came from America. He looked at me. He told me that, "Gee, what happened, Rinpoche?" I said, "I'm okay. Nothing happened." "Oh, you're growing." Of course, I said, "I'm growing." "No, I'm sorry. You're growing wrong side. This way." So, okay. Yeah, so then he investigated me. So I think it's very important. The food is very important. Diet is very important. So let me help you. So he investigated thoroughly how I'm eating, how I was eating. So he found out I was drinking 5 bottles of Coca-Cola, this big of rice, and a little bit of vegetable. So he told me, "No, Rinpoche, what you're eating is wrong. That's why you're growing this way." So then he told me, "Oh, the insight, hearing, he's giving, Coca-Cola, if you put one tip inside the Coca-Cola tonight, tomorrow morning your tooth will be disappear. And rice, carbohydrate, no use, eat more vegetable." So soon as I hear about rice, next day I could cut my rice this to this. Because I got the right view on the rice, but although I got the right view of the Coca-Cola, but it takes 5 years to eliminate from me. So I meditate on the tooth disappearing for 5 years based on the view of his instruction. So I'll cultivate. Finally, so now I don't drink any more Coca-Cola, just Pepsi. Joking. No, I was joking. No Pepsi also. Just pure water. So I think it's very important to right understanding, hearing, reflect, and meditate. And out of that, through right view, through right meditation, and my body now slim. The action, the fruition, the view, meditation, through view and meditation helps right contact, and now right fruition, which I'm less fat in my belly. So I think those understanding is very important, and at the same time, what I understood here through the Buddhist practice in difficult time is that to make differentiate, not everything locked in one thing. So here, the physical body, and also the subtle body, and cognitive consciousness. So it's very important to see those things are not as one. So I have this experience. About 10 years ago, I went to one of my nunnery in Muktinath, close to Tibet border. I was supposed to fly around 8 in the morning, Nepal and India. So they flew around 11 o'clock. It was a very small plane between the two rocky mountain, very strong wind. So that much, I was gone. About 20 minutes. So my body is up and down. So at the end result of that, I had a panic attack in my system. So then it took me, I think, many years. Then I flew through, usually I fly from British Airways, from Delhi to London, and London to US. After 3 years, still is inside of me. Every time, a little bit of bumpy. So here, very important thing is, all this stuff, I want to make this very clear. All this stuff, 95% of human problem right now, I think it stays inside of our subtle body. We think it's our cognitive problem, but actually it's not cognitive problem. It's in the body, but not the gross body. It's the subtle body. It stays inside of you. Even most of human psychological stuff, we call it psychological, but it's not. How we know? Because you go to the medical doctor, they check, they say no problem. Then you go to psychologist, they don't see anything, but somehow they will make appointment anyhow. So, but it's not the cognitive problem, it's just the body. So after 3 years of my traveling, every time bumpy comes, I thought, oh, now I'm going to die. Same event is happening. Actually, it's in the subtle body because of the outer circumstance. It sort of provoked this in the subtle body. You feel like, oh, this is going to happen like I had 3 years ago. And mind, cognitive start to believe, yes, it's happening. Okay? And ego thinks it's me happening. So if you lump these three things together, the subtle body happening, and me thinks, yes, this is happening, it's true, yeah, it's really happening. Your cognitive mind, I'm too loud? Okay. So, and then ego thinks, yes, it's me. I'm sure there's no way to transform. So, through my Buddhist practice, we practice meditation on shamatha, with, without, calm abiding meditation. So what I did is, this event comes inside of me, I try to rest on the nowness of the present moment. So, and from that resting, I start to educate my mind. It's not true. This is different time. I flew already 3 years, nothing happening. Now I'm in the British Airways, not in small Nepali airplane. It's a different thing. It's not you, it's different time. This is not me. So I start to see space underneath. I see the openness, I see the space, slowly, without believing of that everything is me. And then I start to change my habitual pattern inside of my subtle body. Now, after 7 years, my panic attack is completely gone. So rather, I'm quite enjoying. Okay, I'm quite enjoying now to fly. So there's a way of changing through meditation. If you have a cognitive steadiness, I think once you have a cognitive steady, that transforms the subtle body and emotions. because emotion sometimes too strong, there's no way that you can purify it. So I think a lot of Buddhist teaching is how to maintain a cognitive steadiness, a right view, a right meditation, right action, you will transform. And I like to see you transform. Thank you.
Pepsi. Did you ever hear the joke about the Pepsi Cola plane and the executives and the cannibals?
No.
One day I will tell you.
Okay.
Not now. Anyway, thank you, Rinpoche. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague and good friend and the esteemed Thupten Jinpa, Geshe Thupten Jinpa and Dr. Thupten Jinpa. He's a Geshe from Ganden Monastery in India, of the Tibetan, like a Tibetan Ph.D., and also he has a Ph.D. from Cambridge in England. And everyone knows him as His Holiness, his wonderful translator. And he's now going to give us 17 minutes. I'm giving you extra 3 minutes, 18 minutes on the view, Rinpoche. Jinpa Rinpoche. Sure, please. What? What? Whatever you like. Whatever you like. Okay.
I thought we were supposed to sit together here, but anyway. Good afternoon. As Greg observed at the beginning, I must say also I'm quite impressed that many of you stayed behind. I was, when one of the volunteers was driving me up, I said that in future, if CTAC wants to do something of this kind, it's probably better to have it as a warming up session than follow up after His Holiness. But having said that, I would like to express my appreciation to all of you. And for me, it's a wonderful opportunity to share this platform with two Rinpoches and my colleagues here, scientists and Geshe as well, and Professor Thurman, and two scientists. I've been asked to say a few words on the view, out of the view, meditation and action. And what I thought I would like to do is to really unpack what His Holiness really said at the end of his beautiful teaching when he talked about the interrelationship between view, meditation, and action, and how it is in fact meditation that connects the two. How can we get from a right view to a right conduct? In other words, how can we translate from knowledge into action? And in a sense, this is not a problem that is something unique, question that is something unique to Buddhism. It's a kind of a perennial philosophical question of any tradition that seeks to understand human behavior and that seeks to understand human motivation. If you look at the West's own intellectual philosophical tradition, there is an old question about, in the Aristotelian philosophy, about how is it that when someone knows something, that it doesn't translate immediately into action. So, and in the Platonic Socratic discourses, and there was always an enduring thread that knowledge leads to liberation. And that was, in a sense, the similar kind of wisdom that we find also in the Buddhist tradition and also in non-Buddhist Hindu classical Indian traditions as well. But the challenge has been to understand, what is the trajectory of the path that leads from knowing something and doing something. Now, of course, in the Greek philosophy, there has been a different answer. One of the answers given was the problem. The philosophers came up with the notion that it's not so much that the person does not know, but there is a weakness of the will, and then the will is not strong enough to bring knowledge into action. In the Buddhist tradition, and to some extent the classical Indian tradition as a whole, and the understanding here is that knowledge alone at the level of intellect is not going to impact your action immediately. That there needs to be some kind of process by which that knowledge needs to be somehow internalized and integrated into the person, the very being, so that it becomes part of your nature, so that when you act, your action would be, coming from that state of knowledge. So by that time, you would have internalized. So in a sense, this is very similar to learning a skill. So when we learn how to drive or how to cycle, in the initial stage, it's a very effortful activity. You have to remember, if you are driving, you have to remember, to look into the side mirrors and, remember all the clutches, especially if you're driving a manual car, which that's how I learned in England. There's a lot of things to remember, and it's a very effortful activity. But as you continue to practice, you get to a point when it becomes effortless. You can have conversations, and although you're not supposed to use cellular phone, but you can do multitasking. So in a sense, the role meditation plays is somewhat similar. It's nothing but, and in fact, the Tibetan term for meditation is gom, which is an active form of the verb to cultivate familiarity. And the Sanskrit term for meditation is bhavana, which also means cultivation. What it says is that meditation is nothing but a process by which you are cultivating a certain types of habits of the mind, habits of the heart, or certain types, a way of being. You are cultivating a certain way of being that may not come to you initially, naturally or easily, but through prolonged, repetitive practice, which involve primarily some form of reflective thinking or reflective kind of internalization, then at a certain point, that process becomes effortless and natural. So that is, in a sense, meditation. Of course, I know in the West, meditation is a very loaded term, and as Tsoknyi Rinpoche was pointing out, it is your lineage gurus, the hippies, who brought it to the West. And also often, at least in the popular discourse, when people think of meditation, they immediately think in terms of some kind of relaxation, or at worst, some kind of emptying out all the thought processes. I remember, many years ago when I was in Cambridge, I was taking the train back from London, and there was a comic strip, and it had 3 strips. And in one of the first scene, there was a young boy sitting down and meditating, and then the second trip was. There's another person standing and asking, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm meditating." And in the second scene, it says, "What does it do?" He says, "Well, it empties your mind." And in the third strip, it says, "Well, I thought yours was already empty to begin with." So, you can see that how, in some sense, this kind of popular discourse, from a positive point of view, suggested that meditation has gone mainstream. But on the other hand, the downside of that is that when the terms like that get appropriated in popular Western discourse, then in some sense it becomes very elastic. Anybody can throw anything into it. So therefore, there is sometimes a tendency to look at meditation purely in the form of relaxation, some kind of emptying of thought processes, although there is one aspect of it, but there are other types of meditation. So therefore, His Holiness is particularly very skillful when often he brings up the topic of meditation. He says analytic meditation. So, and the point he's making here is to really impress upon people that meditation is simply not a matter of stopping thought processes. Although there are those forms of meditation, but also there are other forms of meditation which involve a deliberate application of our reason and analytic thought processes. So in fact, if you look at meditations like loving kindness, meditations like compassion, these are very active thought processes where you are evoking certain types of sentiments within you by using imagery, by, first of all, cultivating through evoking an image of someone that you truly care for, and once you have evoked that sentiment, then learning to somehow expand it so that you are able to extend it beyond the immediate circles of your relationship, which is normally what we are capable of doing. So meditation involves the utilization of all of these various resources. So His Holiness very beautifully, in a very, just one or two sentences, really made that point, how, between the right view and right action, meditation is the link. So to the perennial philosophical question, why is it that knowing something does not immediately result in doing it? Because that knowledge hasn't been internalized. That knowledge has to be integrated into your being. Now, this idea of view, meditation, and action and conduct is something that is explicitly brought out in the Tibetan tradition. But if you look at it, what it does is to really trade upon a process that is very natural. I mean, we know, for example, from scientific research that those children who have been constantly exposed to, angry faces, angry outbursts, a lot of hostility when they're growing up, they internalize certain image of the world, and then, they become hypersensitive to people's expressions, and they see anger where there isn't anger. So what is happening is that you adopt a particular view of the world, and then from that view, you act out. And similarly, we know that there's a very interesting research that is being done by economists whose main interest in learning, people's behavior, what makes people buy certain things and what makes people cooperate, and so on. One of the interesting discoveries they have made is that among those people, those who tend to identify more strongly with their future selves, they tend to save more. So there's an amazing discovery that how the way, you see the world has, and probably these individuals are not in themselves not conscious of how this is affecting. So similarly, there are, many examples. For example, like in the Tibetan tradition, there is an expression that someone who sees the entire world as an enemy. Now, if you have that kind of perception of the outside world as hostile, dangerous, kind of uncaring, then of course you're going to act out from that state of mind. So we can see how our view of the world, we can call it view, but now when I use the term view here in the natural sense, I'm not talking about some kind of cultivated philosophical view. It's basically every individual, when he or she has a certain view of the world. There is a certain way of understanding. It may be in the more educated, philosophically kind of tuned people, it may be more articulated. But for a lot of people, it may be unarticulated, but there is a certain way of kind of, seeing the world that has a tremendous impact on how you act. Similarly, your own self-representation. Now, this is a fancy word for how you see yourself. Every individual has a self-representation. Now, if you see yourself as a compassionate, caring, loving, social person, then you're going to act according to that view of yourself. On the other hand, if you see yourself as this very hard, cold, calculating, capable, clever person, you're going to act in that way. So each of us has internalized, as a representation of ourselves, and from that representation, then we act in the world. So although this more explicit discussion of the connection between view, meditation, and action may be found in the Tibetan tradition, but actually what it does is to really unpack a natural process that is really very much part of our being in the world. So I think here we can, and one of the virtues of, being exposed to an explicit discussion of the kind that we were exposed this morning to His Holiness's teaching and Tsoknyi Rinpoche's presentation is that we can do something about it. Once we understand the process and the mechanism, then we can learn to in some sense, rewrite that narrative about ourselves. We can rewrite that story that we told about, we tell ourselves about the world. Now here, for example, we know that the more you are able to bring in, His Holiness pointed out this, in his teaching, that if you are able to bring in some awareness of the teaching on no self, then when you're in the heat of an intense anger, if you are able to simply take a step back and ask the question, what is the object, who is that object of anger that I feel so strongly negatively about? Whether it is the body, it is the mind. Say, imagine, there's a guy called Tom that I'm completely angry at, and then if I'm able to take a step back, now that is the challenge. You need that reflective kind of pause. Once you're able to take that pause, step back, then you can ask, who exactly is this Tom that I'm feeling so negatively about? Is it a body? Is it his body? Is it his mind? The moment we do that, immediately kind of, undoes the basis of that anger, because anger and these powerful negative emotions require some kind of solid target. So we can see how, these understandings, and it need not necessarily be confined to just Buddhist ideas alone. You can bring in, for example, there is this beautiful story His Holiness shares with people about a Jewish school teacher who runs a summer camp where he brings together children from both Palestinian community and the Jewish community. And one of the things that he does is to teach all the children how to see in the other person's face, God's image. Now, as a result of this kind of summer program, this teacher shared with His Holiness that one of his students, a Palestinian student, later told the teacher that after that, whenever he's confronted with very, aggressive-looking Israeli police at the checkpoint, in the past he used to get so angry and mad and hate them, but he can now bring this idea of seeing God's image on the face of these soldiers, and he doesn't feel angry, he doesn't feel hateful. So you can see it's just not, it is, the effect of this is not confined just to Buddhist ideas of impermanence, dependent origination, emptiness, loving kindness, and so on. Basically, you can bring as part of your view whatever ideas that may be beneficial, drawing from your own spiritual traditions. Then, when that become part of your basic outlook on yourself, on your world, on the people around you, then from this, and if you are able to occasionally reflect upon this so that you can act on it, and then there is also, the relationship is not just a one-way, review to meditation, meditation to action, but there is a loop. Actually, as you act, then you start to take joy in this. And as you start to take joy, for example, if you are doing something very, beneficial to others, like saying serving in a soup kitchen on a Christmas day, then as you do it once, twice, and third time, then your focus begins to shift onto the other person. And when you see the joy in the other person, it gives you a sense of joy. And then this joy, loops back into your way of seeing the world, and that becomes internalized. So there is a wonderful kind of, cycle. So it's not just a one-way connection. There's a connection, and as you do more of this, then you will also begin to cultivate a self-representation of yourself as someone who is caring, who is concerned about others' welfare. So I thought that unpacking what His Holiness said right at the end, which in these two sentences, that meditation is the connector between the two, I thought was very powerful, and I thought I would take the opportunity here to share with you and try to sort of give it a more kind of content, and so that you have a better way of understanding this, so that it's also, I don't want you to go back thinking that, this is just only a Buddhist idea. It is in some sense a universal idea, and although the explicit discussion of this may be found in the Buddhist text, but it is applicable in all other traditions as well. Thank you.
I'm supposed to, maybe you want to come back there? Then we can be together with everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Thupten. So now it's my turn, and then we have some sort of question and answer for a few minutes. I go for 15, then we have question and answer. The view, I like to translate Samyak Drishti, Yandak Betawa, as realistic view or realistic worldview. I like it better than right Alan Wallace actually made the suggestion years and years ago, and I really like it. Because the whole thing about Buddhism that distinguishes the Buddha's discovery from a religious discovery is that supposedly the Buddha discovered the nature of reality. And when he discovered what reality truly was, the reality of himself, the reality of the world, he was really happy. And then he thought that other beings, if they would discover that, which he noticed that they could, since he had, that would make them happy. So in a way, Buddhism is really a discipline of realism. Because the more you know of reality, the happier you will be. The more unrealistic you are, the more miserable you are. And the basic ignorance means unrealism. You don't know really what the world is. Two of the Buddha's most famous disciples, actually, these two gentlemen here that are at the bottom of this tanka, Shariputra and Maudgalyayana, the most famous monastic disciples of the Buddha, they were looking for a teacher, and they were wandering in the bazaar, and they met an old monk who seemed to be, somehow had a different atmosphere about him. Something seemed to be really together about him from all the other ones they had been visiting, all the gurus and all the teachers. And they said, well, what does your teacher teach? Who is your teacher? What does he teach? And he said, well, I can't really say. You go see him. And they said, no, you must be able to tell us something. So then they said, Om ye dharma hetu prabhava hetun tesham tathagata hiyavadat tesham chayo nirodo evam vadi mahashramaniye swaha. Okay?
Great.
So what that means is that all things arise from causes, and what are those causes, and how to terminate them, that is what the great ascetic taught. And somehow those two great brilliant disciples, Shariputra and Bhagavan, when they heard that, they said, oh, that's our teacher. We're going to his place. So the first thing about realistic view is that you come to an acceptance, a belief in, a realistic view of causality, which means that you accept being part of a network in a web of causality. It means you look at what causes your own states of being, of unhappiness or happiness, and you see what you do and what that causes. And a realistic view of causality precludes the idea that something can ever come from nothing. In other words, an uncaused cause, that's impossible. So that's therefore the beginninglessness of the Buddhist world, and the beginninglessness of all of you, and the fact that all of us have been here beginninglessly with infinite previous lives. Similarly, the endlessness, because no something can ever become nothing. That would be an unrealistic view of causality. Every cause produces an effect. Every effect becomes a cause of something else. And so we'll be here forever too. We think we'll be done at 4:30, we'll go home and take a break, but never. We'll be here forever. And sometimes the Tsoknyi Rinpoche will be talking forever. We'll have to listen until we get sharp. And poor guy, he'll run out of a voice and so on. We've been in this lecture in former lives many, many times, according to the Buddhist view, and we'll be here. We'll be in each other's face here forever. That's why we develop a bodhisattva vow, because we say that if we're stuck with all of you guys forever, we all better be enlightened. Otherwise, if someone is miserable and freaked out or harmful and unhappy, then we're all going to be unhappy, and that's going to be terrible. So the only logic way to be together forever is for everyone to be happy. And the only way to do that is for everyone to be enlightened. So the realistic worldview of accepting causation is a very, very powerfully changing thing. And in America, it's very difficult for us because we're taught that we somehow happened when we were born, when mom and dad got it on or conceived or sometime. And then we're taught that when we die, we're just finished and it's all over. It had no purpose. It's random. It's nothingness. And that is really unrealistic from the Buddhist view. It's blind faith. It's even blind faith in nothing, which is even more blind than blind faith in some illogical other thing. So, and what it does, you see, we all want to be in the moment, but when the moment is ends in nothingness and is meaningless, it's a little bit liberating, but it's kind of a false liberation. When you're in the moment, when you realize that this moment contains the seeds of an infinite future, of all your future lives. If you have a positive thought in this moment, that will become infinitely positive. If you have a negative thought, it will be infinitely negative. If you do a negative thing, it'll have infinite reverberation. That gives a huge weight to this moment. And it makes you really mindful that you want to do the right thing, you want to think the right thing, you want to say the right thing in this moment. So the acceptance of causality is really, really important. And it takes a lot of reflection and critical reflection about whatever distorted ideas of causality you might have, which we're up with in our culture. Then the second way of looking at the view is what are called the four epitomes of the Dharma. Everything is impermanent. All egocentric states of existence or ignorance-dominated states of existence are suffering, are frustrating, are annoying, irritating. There is no fixed self within the fluid continuum that is the real self. And that nirvana is the only real happiness and the only real peace. We shouldn't really think that when we get to heaven or when we get to the beach or when we get married or when we go here or there, we're going to have happiness. Only nirvana will bring it. And so those four things are said to be four insignia of the Dharma, and they are also very important. And again, we tend to think we are sort of always here, we never change, there's something unchanging inside us that witnesses everything that we do, so we don't understand anicca. The dukkha, we think that we'll be happy when we get comfortable or whatever, when we have do something, have some relative thing which is only temporary relief of suffering. Worldly happiness is said to be the suffering of change because it never lasts. And then anatma is a really important thing. It's anatma in a way, selflessness, because we think that we're really us. Like I always like to say, my name is Bob. So I would say, my problem is I think I'm the real Bob. And I even get annoyed. I meet somebody else whose name is Bob. I think that's my name. Like, what this? There's no other Bobs around. And all of us are like that. And we have this falsely constructed absolute self inside. And this is what, and we think that's the most real thing inside. And then we think that, therefore, we then think that we're the most important thing inside. And that's why we have a miserable time, because it makes us paranoid. Because why? Everyone here, therefore, is the most important person here to themselves. And everyone here knows that nobody else agrees with them in the whole room. Not a single other one agrees. Everyone else thinks, not only do they not agree that you're the most important, they're annoyed with you that you don't think they're the most important. And so that's the samsara. That's each one out for themselves. It's the absolute real thing. And everyone against everyone else. It's the real samsara, it's the suffering. The Buddha world, the Buddha verse is where everybody doesn't care much about themselves. They find themselves boring, and they really care about everybody else. So you give up worrying about yourself, and you get a situation where everybody cares about you. It's like 100% better. It's totally better. So now how do we get, now the key thing about realistic worldview is that this is where wisdom is mobilized. And wisdom is, the fundamental goal of wisdom is to see the reality of the world. And to see the reality of the world, we have to see the reality of the self. And to see the reality of the self, we have to look, and we have to critically look at what unrealistic sense of self we do have. In other words, Buddha is very, when Buddha said, everyone is selfless, he knew very well that nobody would agree with that. And he didn't want you to meditate on selflessness. Because if you meditate on selflessness, you have a deeper instinct about the real reality of yourself. You will end up thinking that what you should do is somehow, if you really concentrate hard, you and everything else will disappear. I can't tell you how many uneasy giggles I've had in Zen centers when I go see people who've done a lot of meditating, and some Tibetan centers, and they had a big long retreat, and I say, it was a great retreat, wasn't it? Yes. Well, the problem is, though, after the retreat, you're still here. And they realize, you gotta go feed the parking meter, I thought, because everybody's looking for an experience of disappearing, they think that's what emptiness means. And that's totally false. Emptiness is right here while you're appeared. Emptiness is non-dual. Emptiness is what makes you relationally capable of being here. But what it means is you are empty of any aspect of yourself that is actually not here, that is absolute, is something bigger than here, that's not related. So when you meditate, when Buddha says selflessness, he's challenging us to look at ourselves as to how we experience ourselves. And when you do this, and they have a famous meditation where what you do, you sit and you think about when someone told you you were a jerk. And you were not a jerk, you think you're kind of cool, and they say, you're a jerk. And then you get like all flushed and hot in your chest and in your throat, and you want to say something, but you're supposed to think about how it feels when you're sort of falsely accused and you're innocent, and you feel a kind of choked feeling as if there's something in there that's the real not jerk about you. And that real you is the rigid, fixed, static, independent, self-sufficient, which His Holiness mentioned this morning, and Jinpa beautifully translated, self that you think is you have constructed in there. We have. I mean, we all have this what's called a self habit, identity habit, identifiability habit, objectivity habit about that self. We all have that. And you have to really bring it out and realize that you have in there. Because when you get a strong emotion, like your anger at someone, when you feel obsessed, you have to have this or that thing, it's because that emotion takes a hold of this falsely constructed sort of absolute thing, and then the drive of the emotion becomes absolute and you become unable to resist those impulses. Do you follow me? And it's provable, even if you think I'm kind of relaxed, I don't have absolute self, I'm really relational. If you think, and then someone comes and steps on your foot, and then you want to bang, you want to hit them, you want to jump. People, when they get really mad, they'll even kill themselves, they'll smash walls, they'll break things, they'll say horrible things to people they love, because they lose control of themselves because this emotion becomes like absolute, because it takes hold of them in that place of a false absolute inside. Do you follow me? So they say you have to meditate on that for a long time and bring it up and realize that you are miswired like that. You have an unrealistic wiring internally. And then the challenge of the Buddha is, okay, you're an absolute self, find it. In case you do, send us a telegram. We'll change our doctrine. You know? But if you don't find it, then you have to cope with the fact that you're only a relational self. And actually, in the process of finding that, often people have experiences as if their whole self disappears and they're in sort of that vast space or something. And that's very tricky, because that is not the ultimate reality. We should be very careful. That can be a kind of entrapped, egocentric, self-centered meditation state of just floating. I'm floating, isn't that cool? Don't bother me. Later, you know, it gets like that. So the key is that's just an experience. One Lama I know, a very brilliant one, he said, what that is your habitually constructed absolute self, dragging your relative self with it temporarily because they're so used to be entwined. And what the wisdom has to do is like a scalpel. Manjushri's sword with the light on it is like a scalpel, and it's meant to disentangle you from that falsely constructed absolute self that is all wound around and constricting and strangling your living, pulsing, loving, friendly, vulnerable, frightened relative self, which is the one that will become a Buddha, which is the one that can also suffer if it's wrongly constructed. So the realistic worldview, the realistic view about the self is totally critical. And I think Rinpoche made the point very well if you jump to meditating before you have that realistic worldview to some extent, you're in danger actually. And we have seen this, people who've meditated a lot, and they meditate, they just go straight to meditating. And they develop ability and facility to concentrate, and they get really focused, and they stand there and they look at the wall, don't think a thing, and then 20 years later they jump up and say, Eureka, I'm the greatest. But they started with I'm the greatest. That's everybody's problem, is they think I'm the greatest. And then these guys reinforce that I'm the greatest with a big meditative I'm the greatest experience. And that's when they ask for a Cadillac or a Rolls Royce, or they become a pain in the neck in whatever Dharma center they live in. So the very important thing is you have to understand with your reasonable mind, with your realistic mind, you have to understand the dislodgement of the sort of the alien in there, which is the absolute you, which is what makes your life uncomfortable. And you have to dislodge that. And then all of your meditation involves, if it's on shunyata, if it's on love and compassion, whatever it is, it's all working to unseat and to dislodge that I'm the one. My old Mongolian teacher always used to say, long before the movie The Matrix, which is my favorite Dharma movie, but long before that, he used to say, everyone's problem is they go around thinking secretly, I'm the one. Really, before Neo, was trying to find out whether he was the one or not. But the point is, the solution to that is not to discover that you don't exist. That's really wrong. We all exist, even though sometimes in the Heart Sutra people say there's no this and no that and no the other. But we all do exist. But the point is, you're only one of the one. That's the key. When you realize you're only one of the ones, then you have an equality feeling between self and other. You can feel real compassion for the other. You take others' perspectives into consideration, and you can begin the Eightfold Path and you can begin to meditate realistically, and you can begin to act ethically realistically, because you'll always, whatever that absolute impulse comes out to do something egotistical, you will stop and question, and you will say, wait a minute, who says I have to do this? And you can then become more relational, and as long as you're relational, you'll probably listen to your wives and so forth, and then you'll behave yourself, okay, or your mothers or whatever. Okay, so that's my spiel, okay, I stopped, even though 15 minutes, all right?
Many people in the audience here today are not very familiar with Buddhism, and so some of the questions are very practical, which is the point of the symposium. The first one is for Thupten Jinpa.
Okay.
You said people will save more money if they view their future selves. What does that mean? What does future self mean?
What I meant was that when there is a greater identification with your own future self, you tend to care for what happens to you later on more. So that was at least the way in which the researchers interpreted the results. So what was quite surprising for them. These were economists and neuroscientists who did the research, and they found out. They were trying to find out why some people save more and some people don't save at all. And they, as economists, they want to understand human behavior, particularly economic behavior. And one thing they found out was that those who tend to save more, there was a correlation between the way they were identifying more with their future selves. So that was the point, yeah.
Professor Thurman, how can one become aware of the right view if they do not know there is a right view or even an alternate view?
You have to learn something. That's the big disappointing thing. A lot of people come out of, in the West, come out of all these schools where they've been learning all these things that are supposed to be very realistic, and then they see a meditation teacher or they hear about meditation and they say, I want to meditate. And especially when they meet Tibetan teachers, for which I very much respect the Tibetan teachers, the Tibetan teachers immediately start saying, Buddha means this, Dharma means this, Sangha means this is the realistic view. In other words, there's a lot of things to learn, which in a way is stimulating your critical wisdom to unlearn a lot of things that we think we know that are, for example, let me just say quickly, often avidya, which is, or marikpa in Tibetan, is translated as ignorance, but actually the way it's glossed in Indian by the great Indian masters, it's asatvidya, which means a knowing of something which is not the case. So actually it's an active misknowledge or misunderstanding that is the real cause of the problem. It isn't just a failure to know, it's like knowing something wrong. So unfortunately you have to learn something. There's a lot to learn. Okay, that's that.
Thupten Jinpa, some people say Buddhism is an atheistic religion. Could you elaborate on the connection between Buddhism and non-belief?
I think the problem with this question is that the term atheism has become heavily loaded. Atheism has come to be associated with someone who has no spirituality, someone who doesn't really... atheism is almost equated today with some form of radical, materialist, secular worldview. So if that is the case, then of course Buddhism cannot be seen as atheism. Because clearly, depending on how you define the term religion, in the classical kind of, the tradition, religion, the definition of religion involves some acceptance of a divine creator and along with it some kind of eternal principle that defines the individual being. From that point of view, of course, technically speaking, Buddhism does not fall into the category of religion. But on the other hand, if you broaden the definition of religion, which some academics have done, like Ninian Smart, where he has identified 7 main characteristics of a religion and developed the definition of religion more on the basis of resemblance theory, then if you look at Buddhism, there is clearly a notion of some kind of a theory of liberation, spiritual salvation. And there is also an understanding of a process that would lead from a state of unenlightenment to that state. There is clearly a role for some form of, whether we want to use the word devotion or not, but some kind of a devotional element where individuals feel deeply inspired by certain associations of a mythology or, myth not in the use in a negative sense, but for example, like for the Tibetans, the whole story of 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara, what he represents, the story that goes behind why he came to have 11 heads and 1,000 arms is a very powerful story, just as the story of Jesus' life is very powerful and it resonates very powerfully to Christian believers. So too, for the Tibetan Buddhists, the story of Avalokiteshvara has a powerful resonance. So these, if you look at these elements, there is simply no way in which you can justify calling Buddhism as a kind of an atheist. So it's a difficult question.
Yeah. Let me just add one thing. In fact, I think it's really quite wrong to call Buddhism atheism because there are so many gods in Buddhism. When Buddha is born, Brahma and Indra receive the baby. Avalokita Ishvara, the word Chandesic, means Ishvara means God, and Avalokita means the God who looks lovingly on beings. And one of Buddha's own names was Deva Ati Deva, the God beyond Laitla, Layangla, the God beyond the gods. And so Buddhism is very theistic. They just don't believe that there's one big boss who's totally controlling everything. They wouldn't want to dump the whole load of samsara on any single particular deity, that's all. So they are theistic but not monotheistic, basically, something like that, you have to say.
I don't know if I would go to the extent of saying that it is theistic.
Well, you might not.
Yeah.
We could debate it. We could debate that. But then what is the name of the capital of Tibet?
Lhasa.
Lhasa, which means the place of God.
Yeah, but I mean, God in that sense, I don't know whether you can call that kind of system theistic.
Sure, it's theistic. It's just not, why should monotheistics monopolize the word theistic? They don't own it. It's a free language. You know what I mean?
Let's have this debate somewhere else.
Anyway, no, that's good. This is Tibetan tradition. You see, because it's a critical-minded tradition, you have to learn, and you have to debate, and you have to discuss. It's just not some dogmas, So we can have differences, and we can work on them and learn something new from each other. Okay? So he's at Cambridge. He went to Cambridge. He does the English view. I'm an American. So now we have a new thing where time is up for the question unless you have more, but actually 3:10 it is the time.
Actually,
do you want to keep your time?
One question.
What?
If there is no self, could you discuss why one should have a sense of personal responsibility?
Because there is a self, of course. No self, we just discussed that, means no absolute self, no fixed, static, independent, self-sufficient, intrinsically identifiable self. That means you do have a conventional relational self, which is mere designation upon the aggregates of body and mind, et cetera, a lot of complications, what the continuum of the self is. But we all, of course, have a self. The Buddha said the person whose self realizes they lack a self is the happy self. That's what he said. Yes? What?
Actually, I need to apologize, especially to the audience here and also my fellow speakers on the stage, that I need to leave.
Oh yes,
so I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. I would have loved to sit and participate in this conversation, and I was particularly looking forward to listening to Khandro Rinpoche, whom I really admire because I'm a father of 2 young daughters. So to see someone like Khandro Rinpoche playing this amazing role, I was really looking forward to listening particularly to you. But it just happened that there is a Mind and Life board meeting happening, and
you can see the videotape on YouTube. Don't worry. you have a busy meeting.
Please forgive me.
And you're a busy translator. We thank you for staying through this time.
Thank
you so much. Thank you. Good old Jinpa. So now we go to the middle part of the program where we're going to discuss with our eminent colleagues from Emory, from the wonderful program there, beginning with Geshe Lobsang Tenzin Negi, who is a good friend and also has a Ph.D. in a Western, from Emory I think itself, and also a Geshe degree from actually Gomba Kage, the Drebong from Drebong Monastic University from Lobsang College. And I have some questions for you, Geshe-la, if that's okay. And the vast majority of scientific studies conducted to date have examined a small range of meditation practices, mostly related to inducing relaxation, concentration, or mindfulness. Would you be able to talk a little bit about why it might be important, you better be able to, to explore a wider range of meditative practices and what you see as important differences between various Buddhist meditation styles that might translate into different emotional or physical effects relevant to health? Please.
I think that when we talk about meditation, first of all, I'd like to say that one of the early Buddhist masters, Aryadeva, he made a very poignant observation where he said that Chola Yiki Dungete Taminala Luikisos, that he said that for the privileged, it is the mental torment. For the underprivileged, it is the physical torment. We know that the societies that are very underprivileged, there is a real concern about food, shelter, medicine, all those things. But the role of meditation in today's society, as we see, at least in the kind of the more evolved, the financially kind of more privileged societies, has to do with finding some solutions to mental torment. By that, what I mean is a certain degree of inner peace. We live in a society where the stress level is all-time high. And I think that's where the meditation, even though it may be brought by the hippie generation, but in the scientific discourse, in the scientific field, meditation came as a way to reduce stress. Dr. Herbert Benson's work with the relaxation response is really a monumental kind of discovery to see how brief meditation can actually reduce the stress and induce relaxation response. So that's where one type of meditation, I think, what may be generally known as mindfulness, shamatha, basic sort of attentional training, has to do with taming our elephant mind. As Shantideva says that in the context of meditation, in the meditation chapter, he says that it meaning that a person who lives with a distracted mind abides in the midst of fangs of afflictive emotions. So that's where I think that the basic meditation, calm abiding meditation, has become very relevant in today's society to find some solutions to our everyday stress and the stress-related illnesses. But I think there is another part to it.
Put your mic down a little bit to put on your shirt. Because otherwise the blowing makes a sound, they say.
And,
thank you.
Yeah, that's better. Okay. And but in as we are understanding meditation scientifically better, and as we are seeing the certain kind of problems in the society, we are seeing also that the interpersonal kind of the stress, psychosocial stress, which my colleague certainly will talk from the scientific perspective, but the psychosocial stress is also, it's kind of rampant in our society today. And that's where I think that for the psychosocial stress, since psychosocial stress has to do with how we relate to each other, how we relate to our bosses, how we relate to our, the co-workers and other neighbors and others, that's where I think that the meditation that can reshape, that can change our perspective of our neighbors and others that we live with, that is a very kind of the relevant meditation, and that's where the compassion meditation,
Pick the compassion one to focus on.
That's right. Yeah. So that's what at Emory, for example, my colleague Dr. Raison and I, we do that. But the compassion meditation, again, not about sitting just simply thinking of compassion, but it has to do with changing the perspective. That's why the view, what is my view of myself in a greater society, in a workplace, in relation to another person. And if I live with a perspective where I put people constantly in categories of my close ones and the disliked ones and the just irrelevant ones, I'm going to be, that will inform my action. When, of course, that if that kind of perspective is so deeply ingrained, as Tsoknyi Rinpoche was saying, that how, that much of kind of our reality is stored in our body, to say that deeply ingrained in our emotions, that is going to come into action in our relation to others. So that's where the compassion meditation, I think, is a very important form of meditation. We heard a lot about the Mind and Life conference last couple of days, but we're seeing that how actively that we can train. And the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, I think, has a lot to say when it comes to training the compassion meditation. So those are the two forms of meditation, like the mindfulness meditation, right. Sort of more, has to do with basically developing a certain stability and the clarity of the mind, like the attentional training, the shamatha. And the other part is this loving kindness, compassion meditation, which again, that has to do with, like as Shantideva says, that all the suffering in the world come from cherishing or kind of, the selfishness, basically. All the happiness or the well-being in the world are the result of cherishing others. And that's where I think the compassion meditation will manifest in personal and social contexts.
Yes, how nice. So now the last thing is that in the few minutes we have left, you also have a program for teaching science to Tibetan Buddhist monks and nuns, which is very interesting and unusual, Western science, that is modern science. And could you relate that a little bit to your focus on compassion and meditation and so forth? It's very interesting, I think.
Thank you for asking that question. At Emory University, of course, we are developing a somewhat comprehensive science education program for Tibetan monks and nuns. It is basically responding to His Holiness the Dalai Lama's call to develop a curriculum in modern science to be implemented as a core curriculum in the monastic education. Because as you know, that His Holiness is very fond of the science and the bringing the science and spirituality together, because he clearly sees that in today's world, that this is a kind of moment where these two forms of knowledge, the Western science in exploring the physical world and the Tibetan science of the mind, that centuries devoted in understanding the mind, to really come together. He sees that in training the monks and nuns, not just the scientists bringing some adapt monks and nuns and the yogis into the labs and then have them meditate and see what goes into their brains or the chemicals in the body, but for a real meaningful kind of discoveries and understanding of our own mind and its potential and how to bring that from just basically simply from the head to the heart, really incorporate that at the deep level. I think that we will have to engage those contemplatives who devote their lives in understanding the mind and emotion and these spiritual practices. So it's a program that the Emory University is developing. Where already in the third year, it has many aspects: developing course material, textbooks, but taking faculty from Emory University, science faculty who go to Dharamsala, and we have 90 monks and nuns from 19 institutions, 19 monasteries and nunneries from India and Nepal. And we are developing that for first 5 years, this course that we are teaching. And after that, that will be implemented into individual monastery nunneries. But the benefit of that is not just simply to educate the monks and nuns in modern science, so that they can talk about some of this, the brain structures and the physics and so forth. But most importantly, what they can bring to the table in their collaborations, in their discussions with the scientists of that knowledge about the inner mind, and that to advance the knowledge and to contribute to the betterment of the humanity.
It could be a very historic thing, because if you think about that, the Abhidharma, which connects to the wisdom, the Abhidharma, Buddhist Abhidharma, it was elaborated in relationship to the Indian sciences of the ancient time. And so this is a revision of the Abhidharma, actually, that you're initiating there. I mean, it would lead to that. It should lead to that. And then it would be very historic.
Exactly. So I think that...
Emory will go down in history.
Well, I mean, that, as His Holiness always talks about the Nalanda tradition.
Emory and Drebung.
Yes. And today's dominant knowledge is science.
Wonderful.
And I think that the monks and nuns would need to understand so that they can also communicate the Dharma better, in the language and through the concept, that the greater world understands.
Terrific, terrific. Thank you. Well, now we move on to Dr. Raison. Thank you, Lobsang. Now, Dr. Raison, I asked Geshe Lobsang why he chose to focus on the study of compassion. May I ask you the same question from the perspective of a practicing scientist? Why did you choose to study compassion meditation?
That's an interesting question. I've been thinking a lot today about this idea of the view, and I've thought for a number of years that there are certain places where the view of Buddhism and the view of science are remarkably conciliant. They're remarkably overlapping. One of those places, I think, is a place in evolutionary theory that suggests that we evolved, and all species evolved, not to see reality as it is, but to see reality in ways that, given what we are, allow us to fairly maximally survive and reproduce. And if you look at sort of the essence of a scientific definition of a living organism, it's something that can approach objects that it wants to eat or have sex with, things that it's attracted to. It wants to flee from objects of danger, so things that it has an aversion to, and you don't want to waste time and energy on things that are of no value to you personally. That really is sort of the credo. Or an organism that can volitionally do that, we tend to think of as being a living organism. And while it certainly works very well, the world is populated with organisms, one of the interesting things that I think science has shown us about the natural world is that if a teaspoon of sugar is good, a pound has to be better. And we're all sort of sugar pounders, by which I mean that we are the inheritors of a biology. Now, this is from a scientific perspective, not a Buddhist perspective, but that we are inheritors of a biology that is overprimed to be too worried about danger, to look too much towards preserving itself, to seeing too much personal opportunity and too much danger everywhere. And, as a result of that, it turns out that, especially in the modern world, you end up losing more than you gain. So we know from lots of studies that people that are overly attached or overly hostile or tend not to notice other people tend to do much more poorly, and they tend to have worse health. And then conversely, another place where science sort of meets Buddhism, I think, is really our increasing realization that if you were to sort of make a list of Buddhist attributes from nonviolence to non-anger to really taking an interdependent view to cherishing other people, that our group and many other groups have shown that there's huge beneficial health effects of this. That one of the few things that it doesn't seem you can get too much of is having really warm, supportive, mutually beneficial relationships with other people. And my interest in compassion meditation was that I really got interested in this idea that if we could, in some rigorous way, teach people to reimagine their social surroundings and transform them from sort of an arena of competition and threat to just even a place of maximal benefit, where things that we tend to instinctively see as being threatening or dangerous are actually opportunities that it might change how the body responds to stress in ways that would be health protective. And I've known about Tibetan things for many years, and I'm quite convinced there's no strategy in the world that is as sort of outrageous in this regard and as thorough as the sort of Lojong compassion meditation, which really takes our sort of instinctively involved predilections, response predilections, and turns them on their head. So you see your enemy as your best friend and source of benefit, and you see ignorance, all the people you're ignoring, as being a potential source of huge benefit and a source of relationships from which you could benefit. So that was my interest, was actually that I thought, it wasn't so much I was interested in studying meditation, it was that I was interested in this as really the most rigorous method I could think of or knew about for trying to change how people saw their own psychosocial activity.
That's really interesting. It reminds me of that study, of the revision that they did at UCSF of the type 1 personality for health risk, where they found out that the number of references to I, me, and mine was what predicted the heart attack. And it wasn't just the busyness or the...
No, that's right. And we've got a collaborator who's developed this little box where you can actually record snippets of people's conversations. And he found, just to add to that, he looked at couples where the man had very bad heart disease and was on the edge of dying, and the woman was healthy. And it turns out that if you count how often the wife said the I or we, the more she says we to I, the more likely the guy is to be alive 6 months later. So not only is it how much you say yourself, but even the people around you, if you're surrounded by people, it's like you said, if everybody in the room is caring about you, this turns out to have huge health effects.
Of course, that's really great. Well, listen, when people think about meditation and health, they assume it helps and they leave it at that. But it's a question when you begin to ask how a mental practice like meditation could change the functioning of the body. Can you shed light on this issue? Tell us a bit more about how something as ethereal as compassion could affect the functioning of the body to improve health.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. It really is pretty remarkable, isn't it, that just something like information, like if I look you in the eye and say, I really love you and care about you, that will lower your blood pressure. That will affect your immune system.
That's really great.
Well, it's quite, we've never quite resolved on the deepest level how information can affect physical processes. This is the kind of thing that drives Western philosophers insane. But we know scientifically, and what we're interested in, especially our research group, is how does stress make you sick? And there is an emerging mind-body science, and unfortunately there's no way we've got time to do any kind of justice to, but I'll give you a quick example. So we know that again, thinking in evolutionary terms, that the reason we get sick is because sickness, all the things like fever and exhaustion that happen to you when you're sick, evolve because they help you kill bacteria, kill viruses. And although you don't like that feeling, there's a lot of evidence in animals and humans that sickness exists because it helps you survive infection. But of course, in the modern world, we've got hospitals, we've got sanitation, flush toilets, antibiotics. A lot of the job that our old inflammatory immune system used to do in keeping us alive has been farmed out. It's called an extended phenotype in evolutionary terms. But we're left, as I said before, with these very creaky, ancient, hyperactive, I sometimes say a redneck with a shotgun, type of immune system that if it senses danger, it fires. But the problem, of course, is that these are very hot, damaging chemicals, and if you just don't like foreigners in general, and you're willing to take out half the room to get rid of a foreigner back there, well, that half the room is the tissues of your body. It's your brain, it's your blood vessels, it's the way your emotions function. And so we know that in general, since we're no longer dying of infection in the modern world, most of us will just die of wear and tear. And that all the great disorders of the modern world, in their simplest sense, are disorders of too much wear and tear. We know that stress and anger, and these negative, afflictive emotional states, they exert tremendous wear and tear upon the body, and they do a lot of it by activating all this inflammation. And so one of the ways that something like compassion, healthy sort of positive emotionality and warm connections with others, is it gives the brain a sense that somebody's got its back, that it's not living in such a dangerous world. And so it then doesn't signal the stress system to turn on all these inflammatory chemicals in the body. And when you don't turn them on, you're just not wearing yourself out as fast. Stress and depression and these negative states are really, in the deepest sense, a sort of a premature aging. And now that we don't need them to survive the sort of all the bacterial and viral onslaught that we've had to face through most of history, we have this rare opportunity to do things that can turn these systems down, not have to worry about dying of infection, and get the benefit of not having a sort of physiologic state in the body that's constantly telling your brain that you should be nervous and in danger and irritable. And so, again, this is why something like compassion meditation is so fascinating. It suggests that this is the kind of practice that can then help the brain truncate these processes. You don't put the wear and tear and you don't get sick.
That's really, really fascinating. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Wonderful. Now, Dr. Rozelle, I understand that you've been studying compassion meditation also in adults. And what are your thoughts for its value in children?
First, we have to maybe point to the fact that because there's so much suffering, we need to counter that, yes, with a sense of loving kindness, with a deep sense of compassion. This is actually the formal antidote, yes. It's true for us as adults. It's even more so true for children. When we think about what basic skills children have, they have a basic functional body, but it's very immature. They need to survive the role of a caretaker. It's a requirement for their own survival to have that kind of connection. What happens in the case of the caretaker not being adequate to the job of the caretaking? It's the child that suffers. So there's a way in which compassion is not just perhaps preferred in children, it is a necessity for life. If we think about the Buddhist teachings of the deep love that the mother has to the child, that example is used for a very good reason. It points to the essential need and role of love and compassion in the survival of the species, let alone as the core of what we need in our own spiritual development. It highlights the utter necessity of compassion in our lives.
That's right. How actually do you get children to meditate on compassion?
Well, there are many different ways of doing this. I can speak to this as a child psychologist. There are endemic to childhood the natural capacity to play, yes? There is an inherent understanding about the role of joy. So in that context, there's a way in which the notions of generosity, of caring for others, caring for self becomes possible. This is all, of course, specific to individual engagement with a particular child. However, there are also amazing programs that are being generated currently for the teaching of compassion and related qualities of being. Through Garrison Institute, there's an example of a program that is being developed called CARE, that is actually refining the methodology for teaching through an educational process some of these skills. So there are a number of ways to do this, informally and formally.
I see. And what would be your dream if you had all the resources and all the time and everything that you could study as a sort of meditation study, scientific study? What would be your dream program?
As I think about what my colleagues are speaking of here at Emory, this is such a dream come true. The years of working with psychological trauma and the negative impact that has on individual children, on families, on societies, what we are developing many technologies to do is to build basic reduction of symptoms specifically. What's missing in the methodology is what is being attended to in this research. It is a profound gift to neuroscientific pursuits as well as plainly for us as human beings. It's going to provide a specific resource to heal the heart, which is so desperately needed.
It sure is. It sure is. Well, I hope you get your dream realized and supported, and the
process,
Emory
I can
program
tell.
really takes off. I really do.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, we have some questions now. So now Anila has questions for you all, I think.
One question I'm getting a lot of is, can we turn the air conditioning down? A request went in about an hour ago, and the university has to go through central engineering, and then it has to turn down. I think it's a little warmer now, right? Oops.
Oh, it's chilly yet.
Dr. Raison, this may be a little bit prickly question, okay? His Holiness supports cross-pollination between Buddhism and science, such as in the Emory Tibet Scientific Project. However, biology, for instance, uses the result of experiments on animals. How can you reconcile this?
That is a great question. And the short answer is I can't. Exactly. Now, the Dalai Lama is interesting, though. You know, he's got a different take on animal research. And at least as I understand it, right, it feels that in cases where it's really beneficial and necessary, that this is quite different, say, than eating meat, where you can really eat vegetables. That there's some things scientifically that can only be understood from animals. So he, at least the last time I heard him talk about this, and he's got a deep, deep feeling for animals. We met with him in Dharamsala a couple of years ago, and he really kind of brought me to tears with it. One point where he talked about the suffering that we've caused to so many other creatures. But I personally struggle with it. I don't do animal research, and I think it's for this reason, partly, is that it bothers me. You know, in medical school, they used to have these things called dog labs, and I really struggled with it, but you basically put a dog to death to understand the autonomic nervous system. And I'm still bothered by the fact that I can still see that beagle. I can see it right now sitting here. So although I'm not above using animal data, I mean, science, modern science would stop without it. I'm personally conflicted, and I have so this is something that's a great question, whoever asked it, and I think certainly at the very least, we need to be mindful about what we're doing. But again, like I say, the Dalai Lama himself has this interesting stance that animal research is more. It's more of a dual thing than, say, just eating meat, because again, it provides knowledge that's not available other ways. But it's a challenge.
Thank you. Dr. Rozelle, we've had a lot of questions about fear and anger, anger and fear, fear and anger. I think this one summarizes it. When the Dalai Lama talked about problems that arise such as anger, he said, quote, "We know we are the real troublemaker. If we're the troublemaker, how can we turn to our inner wisdom for solutions?"
The trouble of anger is part and parcel of what I think trauma has caused in our society. There's a deep malaise, and this level of emotional response is the response to that malaise. There's deep suffering, there's deep fear for one's life, fear for the quality, lack of quality in experience. So I think as people first hear the teachings about we're our own worst enemies this way, we need to take responsibility for changing anger, the recipient of these teachings are met with a sense of, isn't this legitimate? Shouldn't I be angry? Shouldn't I be affronted? Shouldn't I be outraged that this horrendous treatment has happened, or that this particular circumstance was illegal or violent? So there's some acknowledgement of wishing for legitimacy and their perception of the ill and harm that's been done. I think what I've learned as a practitioner and what I've seen in the work within psychological trauma is that the first step is to say this is legitimate. There is harm. And given what we understand of the view in a Buddhist context, this is useful to acknowledge that this is a perception. This is real for what in the relative world has happened and warrants response in kind. The healing, it seems to me, then comes in the form of what we can do in understanding different perspectives, understanding the context for that suffering and modifying it with a new perspective. And that is, with the range of resources within Buddhist practice, built over time.
Thank you. Geshe, this might take you back to your debating days. Are emotions in the mind or the body? And a related question to that is, in a world that encourages so much anger and divisiveness, how can we overcome that emotionally and turn ourselves towards compassion and kindness?
That's a great question, and it's a classic question, whether emotions are in the body or the mind. I mean, that's the debate about James Cannon debate, right? Whether emotions arise in the body and get registered in the brain, or they are induced in the brain and they're felt in the body. There are different theories, but I think, first of all, the term emotion itself in the Tibetan language, over the last couple of decades, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the various scientists have been discussing, the exact term is yet to be defined, the emotion itself. But if emotion, as I understand from the Western perspective, and to see it from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective, it comes something to close to what's called the nyongso, that it is a certain felt experience, and in that way, it certainly has a very bodily, physical component to it. The feeling in the body. Actually, one of my greatest kind of the writers in this field is Candace Pert, who wrote the Molecules of Emotions, and it's a really beautiful work where she talks about how emotions are stored in every molecule in your body. But the emotions are also in the brain. There are certain, what Antonio Damasio would call, one of the leading neuroscientists would call the secondary emotion, that we actually feel when we get angry, when we are feeling certain guilt and so forth and so on. So it may manifest in the body and it kind of rise to the body. But in any case, there is a real, I think, good understanding now that our deep part of brain, what may be evolutionarily older parts of the brain, like the amygdala and what some people may call limbic system, emotional brain, deeper parts of the brain are more, obviously closely related to our kind of spontaneous emotions of whether fear and so forth. But then we have, as a humanity, from the evolutionary perspective, we understand that there is a much evolved brain now that comes into reasoning and thinking and so forth. So how to work, how we can work with our emotions is, this is a field that I have given some thought about, because I did my dissertation in this field, emotions and its impact on the body. So one researcher, Joseph Ledoux, that in the audience you probably would, many of you I'm sure aware of him. He was the one who decisively was able to discover amygdala as the seat of emotions, both for input of stimulus and the output of the fear response. He has a really kind of the brilliant observation, and I think that has a tremendous kind of room for Buddhists to think about, and that is that he talks that evolution, since the brain evolved evolutionarily, the connections from those deeper emotional parts to the newer parts, that or the executive part of the brain, are much stronger. Whereas the connections the pathways going from the emotional, the thinking brain, the executive brain, to the emotional brain are fewer at this point in the evolution. And that's why when the emotions take hold of us, they hijack our reason and thinking, that it just simply makes us incapable to use reason. But he says that in time, perhaps there will be more balance of pathways both ways. And the Buddhist practice here, the meditation, the training, meditation basically is a training. The training in a certain skill, familiarizing or deepening, reinforcing a certain skill, whether it's the view, the perspective, or simply the focus and so forth. So I think that it's through this training, the training, as you can say that actively, using logic and reasoning, consciously developing certain perspective, whether interdependence and so forth, that everybody wants to be happy and not suffering and so forth. We are equal, deliberately bringing that recognition, again and again, and sitting with that to actually, change the deeper level of our responding or reacting to others. So I think that the meditation is a way to kind of bring that balance.
Thank you, Geshe.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you. So now we have the pleasure and delight, and you need a mic now. Oh, you have another mic. Okay, good. The pleasure and delight of introducing the Jetsun, Her Eminence Jetsun Khandro Rinpoche. And I think you do, and look at that, everybody, automatic. That's my mentioning the name. Would you like to sit over there, or you're fine here? Okay, so please go ahead. You have plenty of time.
So, good afternoon, everyone. And a wonderful day that we've all been blessed with. And I've been given the responsibility to say something on action. Whenever such a situation comes, when we are in the presence of a great master such as His Holiness, and then that event is further made beautiful and enriched by eminent speakers, great scholars, great masters that we have had the precious opportunity this afternoon. I suppose one of the situations that we fall in is kind of trying to get everything in one afternoon. We've done that. Many of us who studied Buddhism have done that. I'm very aware of the fact that there are so many of you who have fair amount or great amount of understanding of Buddhist philosophy. And therefore, whenever certain terms are used, no self, emptiness, Atman, Anatman, quotes are read, commentaries are made upon that, it's fairly easy for you to catch on and understand the context in which it is spoken. I myself often have had to struggle with trying to keep up, and often forgetting one of the facts is this is an ocean of wisdom. And if we try to get everything in one afternoon, in 15 minutes, in a sentence, in a dictum, it will always be very difficult unless you've studied that subject matter for a great number of years. Great sages, great enlightened masters have practiced this, analyzed it, debated upon it, meditated upon it, put it into action, and understood that profound view. Sometimes you and I begin to think we'll take the shortcut based upon his or her experience and clues. I'm going to avoid all of the struggles of this life, of this world, and get to the result, which often leads us to enthusiasm. and we're very, very enthusiastic. And our nature, as the Buddhist teachings say, being basic goodness, as His Holiness always says, everyone wants happiness. Nobody wants suffering. Driven by that, each one of us here will be enthusiastic in trying to find the way to end suffering, to become a good human being, to bring about a universal approach of harmony between different religious doctrines, different views, understand emptiness so that we can be selflessly happy. But at the same time, you and I have jobs to keep, families to go back to. Today is a Saturday. We're lucky if tomorrow is an open day, and then back to work on Monday. We meditate. It is not that we are lacking in that enthusiasm. But at the same time, it's very crucial for all of us to keep in mind that this is not, it is easy, and yet it is not as easy as can be done by a few clues and a few easy steps. There is no easy step to becoming the perfect human being with absolute peace and harmony. There is no shortcut. There are no bullet points that we can keep in mind and just be able to be enlightened Buddhas. If that could be done, this problem would have been solved a long time ago, isn't it? So what can we do is make sure that the basis and the foundation is upon tolerance with your own self, patience with your own self. Not get into the race, the competitiveness with your own self, your own enthusiasm, to try and do something that is extraordinary for you at this moment, but to be able to begin the path of kindness, of being able to understand what the teachings are about, to understand the view of what the true nature of self is, to meditate, to study, to contemplate, beginning with the intention of working with your own self. So action, whenever we talk about a subject matter such as today, view, meditation, and action, if you separate these three subjects and you see them as sequences or diverse from one another, that you spend time with view, then you spend time with meditation, and then you go into action, you'll be making a mistake. One of the very important things to understand is you are the view. It's your mind. You'll have to cultivate that. Meditation and a big deal that is made out of meditation need not be made into such a big deal. Meditation is using common sense. You have the thinking power, the potential to discriminate between right and wrong. Making that more your habit is becoming familiar with mindfulness, which is the purpose of meditation. But none of this view, none of the meditation, none of the enthusiasm itself, or the purpose of being human being, is going to be of any good to oneself or to the others without it being articulated into action. So the beginning is to begin by tolerance, real patience with your own self. Keep the enthusiasm and the motivation to working with the view. Practice mindfulness, meditation by all means. All the learning, all the knowledge, all the different kinds of methods that you are able to meet with, cultivating them. But recognizing that the purpose for this is not a complex philosophy. The purpose of all this is to become good human beings. It's very simple. There would be no reason why so much scientific research would be done. All the dialogues between the scientists and the Buddhists, that so much effort has gone from His Holiness, all the eminent scholars, all the scientists, all the great teachers. There is no reason also to talk about a universal approach, a harmonious global family of different faiths and religion. And there is really no reason for this afternoon, this day to have happened if there wasn't the intent from the perspective of the Buddhists to understand that Buddhism, the philosophy of Buddhism, and again, on a tangent, I would say, is the term Buddhist philosophy itself is a temporary I think, tag or a temporary, let's say, designation. Because people do ask, which philosophy? So you need to identify it. So it's because it's the Buddhist philosophy, so therefore we say Buddhist philosophy. Otherwise, one of the most fundamental essences of Buddha Dharma that you will find is that it is a human philosophy. And so what Buddhism tries to teach, and why there is all this research and all of the great masters' teachings still there, is for us to begin to be able to understand that being Buddhist is to discover human potential. Whether it is the brain, whether it is the emotions, whether it is the heart, whether it is the body, whether it is the consciousness, whether it is the self, whether it is the no self, ultimately, this is all you. It is about one's own self. And in that self, there is an incredible ability called common sense. Spiritual, philosophical languages often say wisdom. I like to call it common sense. A common sense that is able to tell it's a cold stadium, we need to put on something warm. It's a nice day, it's a bad day. That very simple common sense, human beings are endowed with it. But how much of that common sense, this wisdom aspect, the ability to discern right from wrong, do we actually use in our day-to-day life? While human beings who are called the most intelligent of all the species and have managed to create this universe, this world today, but at the same time, the same human being has to learn from philosophy the art of compassion. And kindness is somewhat very ironical. And out of that sort of irony, what we call ignorance, we then find the birth of the Buddhist philosophy. The great compassionate enlightened Buddha, his teachings are completely founded upon this very simple philosophy, this simple foundation. Human beings have the capacity to think, and they need to think. They need not to only think of self and self only, but that there is a greater capacity to go beyond the self, to actually think universally, to think of the others. When a single body is surrounded by hundreds of people, and yet the capacity is only to think about yourself and to deny the presence of the hundreds around you, that is called ignorance. So if you have a mind that has the potential to really think beyond self, using that ability of the human mind to bringing about greater happiness for oneself and for the others is the main purpose of the Buddhist teachings. By developing a view of no self, what is the result that we should obtain? Is greater kindness and the ability to be able to acknowledge the presence of others and their needs as being as important as one's own self. What's the point of meditating? Is also for the same purpose, is that through the familiarity of meditation, contemplative, analytical, resting meditation, whatever different kinds of meditation it may be, is that from that one may be able to develop the same inner potential of awareness of the needs of the others as equally important as the needs of one's own self. That's what we call compassion. If we can do this without any organized or systematic religion or spiritual philosophy, that person may not believe in any particular faith and yet may be an excellent, what we call, Buddhist meditator. So the question that we have about, is Buddhism similar to atheism or not? One can't make a clear demarcation of such is because, in one way of speaking, there is no Buddhism if every human being understood what a human being should do. That is Buddhism. If you want to call it a religion, it is a religion. Many of us see it as a religion and we follow that. And on the other hand, if you can do so without believing in any particular thing, this is as what His Holiness continually says, you do not have to change a faith or a religion to be able to actually emulate the most perfect, excellent potentials of a human being's quality, the most epitome of that quality being discerning wisdom, that you have the possibility to discern between what is a cause of unhappiness And equally, you do have the potential to work on that awareness and eliminate those causes that bring you unhappiness. You have the ability to discern between those causes that bring you happiness and to cultivate those causes of happiness. Those of us who are Buddhists and we believe in the theory of karma, cause and effect, and we say, by being a good Buddhist and eliminating negative actions and creating positive actions, I will create, or I will have good karma. And because of that, I will be able to either benefit others or exhaust birth in samsara. That's very good. That's the result you want, but you have to do the action. Abandoning negative causes, cultivating good causes. Someone who doesn't believe in life after death, doesn't believe in or doesn't know what is karma, what is cause and effect, but understands human potential. That I am a person with common sense, with the possibility to discern between what is right and wrong. And I want happiness, but the happiness is dependent upon good causes of peace, patience, kindness, love, compassion, sympathy within my own self. Scientifically, as you said, proven that if that positive seed is within one's mind, your body, your mind, the environment itself becomes healthy and happy. In the same way, negativities, anger, jealousy, hatred, ignorance, attachment, stinginess, aggression, ego, if those negative causes are harbored, then no matter how much we may try to aspire to have happiness, it's never going to be realized. Buddhistically, we say that. Scientifically, as our eminent scholars have spoken about. So one may not need to become a Buddhist, but if one is concerned about having happiness, eliminate those negativities that are within one's own mind and body and speech. Create ground of happiness for yourself. If you can think broader in the way that the Buddhist teachings talk about, is that you do not think about your own happiness, but you think about others' happiness, then that's again another way of looking at it. But as they say, the point is to catch your nose. Whether you catch your nose this way or you catch your nose that way doesn't really matter. Religious, non-religious, believer, non-believer, self, no self also in this case, doesn't really matter. What matters is each one of us has that potential, and why not use this? Why not use this immense, incredible, creative ability that we are endowed with, called the discerning wisdom. That discerning wisdom, which is our within, or intrinsic of our own selves, and yet, if we do not use that, this is what the Buddhist teachings talk about as being ignorance. So, sort of a summarization of what we have been talking about today. But closer to the end, in relation to action, His Holiness did point out what are called the Eightfold Path. And therefore, just as a way of coming to something that we may all work with until we are able to, again, receive teachings from His Holiness, I would say, reflect upon these 8, what are generally called actions of Buddha Dharma. If they are divided into 3, they are divided into view, conduct, actions, or also called ethics, and mental development, 3 demarcations or divisions that His Holiness spoke about this morning. But what are generally called Eightfold Path, that are known as actions to develop. First one is right view. Now, keeping in mind there is no Buddhist view here at all being mentioned. Right view. Cultivate in one's own daily life right view. If you can go as far as to take advantage of all the great blessings of teachings that you have received on no self, the analysis of the nature of self, and develop from that the right view as is taught within the Buddhist doctrine, excellent. But a right view may be as simple as, I'll be kind, I'll talk less, I'll fight less, I'll argue less, I'll be more quiet, I'm going to be more patient. Any good view that allows your life to have the purpose of not only bringing peace and harmony for yourself, but for others. Second is right thought. You have the possibility each moment to produce a thought that is full of aggression or selfishness, or you also have the possibility to have good thought and maybe no thought. That's also good. Third thing, right speech. Personally, I always say there's no greater right speech than silence. So be quiet. Sometimes find yourself moments where you can be just silent. If you must talk, say something nice, say something kind. Right action. Do something good. Pull a chair for someone. Leave in an orderly way. Physically be of help to somebody. And if you're blocking the view for somebody, be conscious. Do something that will give others a better view. Use your body in such a way each day that it can become a source of happiness for others, if possible, if not, for yourself. Right livelihood, making sure that everything that we are doing is capable of bringing some joy, some happiness to the others. One of the examples that comes into mind are the bodies of many of those animals who are used in experiments that further helps human beings. That is, in a way, right livelihood, not of the scientists, but of the animal, is that their life is of great purpose and benefit to the others. You and I may not have such a possibility or courage to do so, but in whatever surrounding areas that we may be working in, whether in family or whether in offices, making sure that that profession, that occupation, that livelihood is of some cause of happiness to the others as much as possible. Effort must always be right effort. This is not going to, the change from our ignorant, habitual ways, aggressive, egoistic, selfish, to suddenly becoming what we aspire to become, a selfless, compassionate human being, an enlightened bodhisattva who is working for the benefit of the others without any grasping, isn't going to be an overnight change. It will have to be built upon laziness. It will have to be built upon many mistakes. It will have to be built upon forgetfulness. But with effort, laziness can be defeated. With effort, forgetfulness can be defeated. With laziness, many mistakes that we make can also be defeated. Being able to understand that if it took so many years for these great masters, what can be said about us? Developing right mindfulness. We are endowed with immense capacity of our senses. Using this sense to actually bringing about mindfulness. Instead of the eyes developing distraction, bringing mindfulness. Instead of the ears always causing distraction, enhancing mindfulness through sound. And in the same way, all of our different senses of smell, of taste, of texture, and particularly our great ability of the mind, using that to develop mindfulness. For mindfulness, slowing down the amount of physical movement that you'd make, slowing down the amount of speech that you utter, and most importantly, slowing down the stream of thoughts that we generate all the time. We're not saying don't do them. At this point, slow down. Instead of 1,000, make it 990. In that way, just slowing down, eliminating those that we can work with, where it develops into then what is called right concentration. A mind that is so concentrated on the wisdom intrinsic of one's own self that it is not swayed and persuaded constantly by the ignorant habitual tendencies of our own egoistic ideas. Mistake comes when we try to reach the perfection of a concentration of a mind that abides in equanimity and refuses to understand the immense importance of this concentration that has been developed upon all the other 7 parts. And so it is important for all of us to be able to understand view is a process, meditation is a process, and actions of developing our body, our speech, and our mind through the actions of awareness, building awareness of our body, building awareness of our speech, building awareness of our own mind, challenges your own self to see how far your meditation is genuine, how far is your own view authentic. Are you only thinking about something? Are you only aimlessly meditating, physically sitting in a posture, as Professor Thurman said? Or is the view really developing? Is it really becoming enlightened? Is it really developing the quality of wisdom? Is the meditation really producing the required result? That can be checked with action. So action plays an important role in that way, is that it engages both the view and the meditation. When the action and the view no longer contradict each other, then you can consider yourself quite enlightened. So that's, I think,
Very nice. Wonderful. So now I think Anila has questions for you and for Tsoknyi Rinpoche especially.
Tsoknyi Rinpoche, there are 2 questions that seem quite heartfelt, and they seem like reverse sides of the same coin. One is, what if your self is not the important one, but it's that you are not liking yourself? And the second is, how do we know if we're making the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas happy? The first one is, what if your self is not the important one, but what if it's a self you don't like? You don't like yourself, you don't find yourself to be good. And then the second is, how do we know if we're making the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas happy?
I think. Can you hear me? No. Hello? No. Oh, there good.
I think it's very important to use a lot of delete button more than saving button.
More than what? More than what?
You have to use delete button more than saving button. And then again?
Delete button.
Delete button.
Oh, delete, okay. Oh, delete button. Delete button more than save button. I got it, I'm sorry. I thought it was butter. I couldn't figure out. You're going to use this and that butter. Sorry. Okay, button. My fault.
We cannot hear so well here. So I think very important to find out the basic unconditional love. I think is very important to delete all the. One of my practice is trying to break through without breaking down. Break through without breaking down. So I think there's lots of layers of self-grasping, self-cherishing, and at the same time, social I. Oh, I'm a teacher, I'm a professor, I'm an actor, I'm in this. So you build out all your I or self around this social I. I think this social I is very hard to maintain, very high maintenance. Because this social I is depend on others' perspective. They want to see you like this, and you start to believe I am like that, and you want to maintain that. I think it's very hard to maintain. So forget about all these things. So come back to the mere I, M-E, mere I, Tsam. Mere I.
Not them.
So as usually we have a Buddhist, we believe there's a self, there's an I, but that I is just mere I until the body, mind exists. There's a name, me, I, but not really ultimately I. So I think it's very important to come back from the social I, break down to the mere I, go back into the your heart, just relax, pure, fine, stay in the zero. Just rest in the zero. I am nothing. I'm nobody. I am no teacher. I'm nothing. I'm just come back, really come back to stay here and find that unconditional well-being, zero, shunyata, whatever you call, rest there. When Japanese talk about shunyata, they just write zero. Artists trying to figure out selflessness is zero, O. So I think that is very important to find the real something. So I always call happy without reason. All the reason are not reasonable for happiness. Just be happy. Come back to the zero and drop, rest there. And tomorrow morning, you want to use your social I as Rinpoche, I will take it. But I'm not going to stay there. So the best example is His Holiness. He always say, I'm a simple Buddhist monk, but at the same time, he received gold medal. Nobel Peace Prize, sorry, thank you. So when people call him His Holiness, he will not say, I'm Buddhist monk. He will say, I'm Holiness. So I think he has the best transition between mere I with the social I. He used social I maximum for benefit for sentient beings, but he lived with the simple zero, simple monk. I think if we can do that, I think we find more delete button.
And Rinpoche, what if someone finds themselves concerned with making the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas happy? What would you tell them? What if someone's concerned with whether or not they're making Buddhas and Bodhisattvas happy?
How do we make Buddhas and Bodhisattvas happy?
How to make Buddhas and Bodhisattvas happy? I don't know. I think if you just be happy yourself, they're happy, I think. If you be kind, you help others, you help yourself, you find warmth and basic well-being, I think they're happy. I think it's the smile need to come from inside. I think in this century, Tibet is different. Tibet, we don't have so much things input. Few yaks, few mountains, yelling each other. You know, there's not much thing in. So we put a lot of colorful things in, feel very good. But here we have so much thing. If you put more dharma in, I think it becomes rubbish. So use the delete button. There you go. I'm nobody, I'm nobody, I'm nobody, I'm nobody, I'm nobody, I'm okay, I'm nobody. I think. Then you feel happy. And you will find unconditional love, really. I will guarantee you.
Thank you, Rinpoche. That I don't want to delete. Khandro Rinpoche, there are so many questions about anger. And these two seem also to be related to me. The first is, how do you tolerate intolerance? And the second is, how can you believe nonviolence works when it was only in the 2008 Tibet riots that the Tibet issue was really in the forefront in the eyes of the world?
I think it will be a mistake if we look at certain, whether it is negative tendencies or whether it is good qualities. Let's take anger and patience. And we isolate them both, that it can only be one. Then that's, I think, taking a very extreme, simplistic view of what this life in this world is about. So if we, in that context, if we say, as a good human being who's trying to practice compassion, we have to develop and cultivate patience. And thereby, that would also mean we'd have to be extremely tolerant towards intolerance. Especially, I think I understand the question as many times it is put, intolerance in the context of where someone is being violent to someone else. Maybe you can tolerate a violence towards yourself, but when you see injustice being done to the others, should we be still patient, or should we then respond in such a way that in all its outer apparent form is not being patient? So this kind of a question often comes about when you then have this simplistic notion of patience being a very solid factor, and that which is almost deplete of the quality of wisdom. For any quality to really be of benefit to others and to one's own self, it has to always be unified with the ability to discern a situation, that factor of quality of wisdom. To be compassionate in a correct way, that your compassion is not harmful to the others, you have to apply wisdom in such a way that some of the greatest acts of compassion may be in not giving compassion. In the same way, one must be patient as much as possible. But when it comes to a point where your wisdom mind can discern a situation that your patience actually is a display of ignorance, then in that situation, according to whatever is most helpful to the others, one must apply one's actions according to that situation. Whenever we do talk about compassion, selfless compassion, very oftentimes people say, if someone holds a gun to my head, then what should I do? Think emptiness? Let myself get shot? What should I do? My answer always is duck, try to run away, try to save yourself. And the other is, most likely this will never happen in your life. Isn't it? Therefore, don't let that idea, that possibility, stop other small things that you can do. So you can't say something like, because I do not have the potential to be so selfless as to get shot, I'm not going to try be kind to the next person sitting next to me. Those kind of simplistic views are, I think, sometimes born out of enthusiasm, as I said earlier, but with kind of too much thinking. So again, coming back to the action part, because I've been told to speak about it. So I think very often Buddhist teaching especially emphasizes analyzing and thinking and discerning very carefully. It's very important. But when it is spoken in the context of actions, I would also say, sometimes just do it. Then you make mistakes. Then you work back with your view and meditation. You do it with lesser amount of analysis and thinking, and then you understand, perhaps better, why this whole issue about self and no self becomes so very important in becoming a good human being. Now the second question about violence and 2008's demonstrations. I think the situation of Tibet, I think, has always been in the forefront, so to speak, maybe not in such an impactful way, but it has always been there. Violence in today's times does attract more news. And it is the modern situation in the world that we have created is that unless a news is sensational, unless it has fair amount of bloodshed and violence or some kind of controversy, you do not get exposure into the media. And so when the demand of the world is such, it often seemingly becomes such that violence creates more news. But that's about 2 minutes of news, if you're lucky, and a few more minutes in the memory of the people, but at the cost of tremendous damage and destruction to other human beings, and mainly those human beings who have nothing to do with it in the first place. And so I think it's very wrong to have the idea that strong violence makes news, therefore that is the result that has to be taken. That, I think, comes out of a situation, sadly, which has caused itself so much, I think, violence in this world. So at some point, people will have to, I think all of us have the responsibility of following His Holiness's vision of not getting into this kind of an attraction at all.
I don't want to interfere in the Dharma discussions, but since that was a political question, I just wanted to say that I think it's a misinterpretation to think that the violence, which was only in Lhasa, out of 200 different demonstrations, only the Lhasa one was violent. And that was pretty clearly staged by Jiang Xingli, the Communist Party boss of Lhasa, to get the Tibetans in trouble with the Chinese people, which he did effectively. So it was very harmful to the Tibetan cause. It caused a lot of hostility against Tibetans in China, which was his intention. If the Tibetans had really intended to be violent in Lhasa, they would have knocked out the cameras right away. It's common sense. Why would they go and rip up some stores with the cameras on them? You know, they know very well the Chinese will get them later and kill them and execute them and whatever. So that was a staged violence in Lhasa, and mostly what was astounding about the Tibetan demonstrations in 2008 was their non-violent nature and the violent response of the Chinese everywhere. So in fact, the fact that the Tibetan cause is still prominent in the world's mind is the result of the non-violent nature of it being so unique. Who has ever heard of what's going on in East Congo? In the last 10 years, there's been 5 million people killed in East Congo, and the most terrible atrocities. You never hear about it. Almost never. So nonviolence is much more outstanding in the planet because it's much more rare because the planet is so militarized. So people shouldn't give up hope about nonviolence, is what I'm saying. I'm sorry, that's what I
Tsoknyi Rinpoche, going back to your earlier comments, a question says, how can we get started catching these problems that reside more in the subtle body than in the cognitive mind? Is that calm abiding practice, analytical practice? How can we get started?
I think two practices is very useful. One is from the strengthening the cognitive thinking from the practice of shamatha and vipassana and go beyond. For example, we have 8 consciousness altogether. 5 sensory consciousness, 6 noticed consciousness, 7 analyzed consciousness, and 8 stores all the habitual pattern. So here, when you interact in our world, or something comes out of our body in the form of emotion, or mood, or sensation, then if we are not ready or strength, we don't know how to let it go. We will carry by that emotion or thought. So there's not, there's no strength in the consciousness to know to follow. Of course, you want to let it go, but you cannot let it go. So instead of that, I think we have to have some, on the 6th consciousness, we have to make some kind of rest point, which is called meditation on shamatha practice. So you make some kind of a parking place that from the 7 consciousness comes, then you can say, okay, 7 consciousness, this is wrong, I'm not going to follow, I'm going to let it go. So most of us, when it's from the information from 6 or from subtle body, there's no way that you cannot say, I'm going to follow, I'm not going to follow, you just follow. So I think it's very important to make mental strength in the cognitive level that you can see, but you're not going to follow. So the best example is hotel's doorman. The big hotel has a doorman. So the best doorman stays at the door. No matter what kind of guest comes, it will not follow. The bad doorman will follow with the beautiful guest and end up in the restroom. So how do you can get the strength, whether you follow or not follow, is to practice a right view and right meditation and right contact on the cognitive clarity. When you have that strength, then in the body, all your stuff, everything comes. Oh, honey is coming. Oh, my stuff. Yesterday I think stuff, oh, it's my body reaction. Okay, you're coming. I know you're coming, but I am busy here. You can come and you can go, but I know you're coming, but I know I'm not going to follow you. Honey, is okay? You know, if you have that kind of capability, you have to develop in the mind. Then the mind can transform the subtle body stuff. This is one. The second one is space. Once you see this is from the cognitive, this is from my ego, this is just from the body. When you have some mark here, you might not think this is me. You might not think this is my problem. Of course, I am some pain here. But when you have a pain in the subtle body, in the emotional level, you think it's me. And your mind thinks, yes, it's you. And then you take over by the emotional pain or subtle body pain. So when if you rest on the openness of vipassana and emptiness, and you just open, relax, and subtle body thought and emotion comes, you give a space, the nature of thought and emotion is impermanent, it will drop. For example, things come, if you grass, it will stay. If you know grass, you know the paper is coming and going, so it's fine. Of course, you have to walk it. So I think it's not that you are like avoiding, or we are not running after. We just simply will provide space into our mind and body and emotion, and we know those others just from the body is not me, is my body. It's not me, it's just my thinking. And you are not locked into it. And you are not become one with the problem. So if you can do that, I think many problems is easy to solve.
We have time for one more question for Khandro Rinpoche and one to finish with Professor Thurman, who's been so kind to moderate this discussion. Khandro Rinpoche, His Holiness made a distinction between the faith that underlies the Judeo-Christian religions and the wisdom that is basic to Buddhism. Does faith play any role in Buddhism?
It's up to human beings. It's up to a person. If you will bear with me, if I may give just one example that I very often use in my own self, is many years ago when I was a child, I read this book, a storybook for children. It's about a stubborn donkey and a very naughty monkey. Both of them decide to enter a race, a horse race, and everyone laughs at this monkey and says, you're never going to win this horse race because the stubborn donkey is never going to move. And so the ready, steady start, as they say, and the race begins. And yes, the donkey doesn't budge at all. So this monkey comes up with this wonderful, unique idea of tying a bunch of carrots to a fishing rod, climbs on the donkey and holds a rod. So the bunch of carrots are just in front of the nose of the donkey. So the donkey begins to chase after the carrots. End of the story, they win the race. Now, I often see faith as this bunch of carrots. We're the stubborn donkey. Do you need a bunch of carrots to make you move? There are lots of faith-based religions. With all due respect, but that's how it works, is that something that you are going to obtain, whether that is no self, whether that is heaven, whether that is peace, whether that is wisdom, whatever it may be. But it is that bundle of carrots because of which then we are going to do that one thing that we are very naturally equipped to do. We're going to be kinder, not lie, be patient with one another, think of others, know what is the cause of happiness, and know how to avoid causes of suffering. Many things that we say, such as the Buddha says, the great masters say, God says, the Creator said, whatever it is that we use, if as a human being we think, we're using this as an inspiration to move on into cultivating these good qualities and avoid doing those things. And in that, I think, because of this, civilizations have sustained to this day. Is that all faith-based religions, as well as many who are said to have lesser faith-based philosophies, but the very skillful wisdom of all these different diverse religions have sustained civilization as far as we have come. Absence of which, whether it is Hinduism or Islam or Christianity or Buddhism or whatever it is, would, I believe, never have allowed civilization to be what it has become today. And so therefore, faith is, from my perspective, I would say, or from the Buddhist perspective, I would say, we see faith as that which at this moment inspires us to go beyond what we think are the limitations of our own potentials as human beings. Very directly, Buddhism has faith, especially Tibetan Buddhism works very strongly with cultivating faith or trust, confidence, devotion. But it is only our friend up till a certain level where you think you have to have the support of something else to be able to delve into your own natural potential. At that point where you develop the ability to have the courage to say you can continue to sustain your own wisdom and your own abilities and your own potential without depending on the other, then the reliance upon faith is also no longer necessary. But that's entirely a different topic. So I think so much is okay.
Professor Thurman, what does it mean, as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I remain and dispel the miseries of the world?
Oh, that means forever. That means forever, forever. And but not to push it too hard. You have to realize there's a Buddhist teaching that all teachings about relative reality, like how many sentient beings are here or there, or how long this and that, are only relative. So it expresses a feeling of determination to stay present with all beings, which is the Bodhisattva's feeling. You know, Avalokiteshvara actually is a Buddha who is pretending to be a Bodhisattva to make people feel better. So he already sees beings as free in the future time, but he knows they don't see themselves that way. And so he's just expressing a strong that people should not feel abandoned, that they will never feel abandoned. So that's all that it means. Not to worry. Don't worry. There's infinite sentient beings, and the Buddha will be here. Buddhas are here for infinite time, because they never get tired, you know, because they're always really happy. So it's just something to cheer people up, is what it is, and an expression of determination, and nothing to worry about. Like, gee, is it really, how many is all sentient beings? How many are they? And when will they get there? And so on. Just don't worry about it. It's an expression of determination to love beings, of a being who sees them as lovable somehow.
The second part of the question was, The second part of the question was, does that mean I shouldn't seek enlightenment until everybody else is enlightened already?
Well, no, there's said to be 3 patterns of enlightenment. There's 3 patterns. There's the pattern like a cowherd, pattern like a ferryman, and pattern like a king. And the Bodhisattva determination like that is the cowherd one, where you put all the cows, all the yaks, of course, Tibetans, they put all the yaks in the pasture and they close the gate and come in last. Then the ferryman is you take them across in a ferry and you all land on the shore at the same time. Then the king is you get crowned as the king, and then you help all the beings with the power of the king. And so, although the first one is the one that gives more sense of emotional determination and dedication to the beings, the last one is more practical, because you can't really save other beings from suffering until you're free yourself. And then the question does come up: how does the Bodhisattva who attains Buddhahood not abandon the beings when it seems like Shakyamuni? Seems like you took off into Buddhahood, dear Shakyamuni, and you left us here in Washington, D.C. And was that breaking your Bodhisattva vow? No. But it seems like that at first. But the solution to that is, he couldn't attain Buddhahood and go ahead in there if he didn't see a time in the future when we will all attain Buddhahood. And not only that, but from his position of Buddhahood, which is universally merged with all reality, he is operating at maximum efficiency to help us get there quickest possible. So it's kind of like that's a mystery in Buddhism, but I think that's the way of solving that mystery. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we conclude. You're going to conclude. Well, now I thought to do a strange thing in concluding instead of making some professorly remarks about you this and that and everybody's so great. I thought, because today this beautiful teaching by Khandro Rinpoche, which I think was arranged by Khandro Rinpoche, I believe. I don't know who put it together, but I noticed earlier on as I was looking through it, a beautiful little meditation here at the end that's very short. I thought we should all meditate that together in honor of Khandro Rinpoche, if you don't mind. No. So I thought everyone should go into meditative mode. That means stop staring at us and just sit quietly, and I will read it, unless Khandro Rinpoche herself would like to read it, but maybe I should read it since I'm not, you don't expect me to read it. I'm sort of the announcer, So just sit in a comfortable position in a clean and quiet space, and forget that it's freezing. Turn your mind quietly toward your wish to be of benefit to yourself and all beings. Just meditate on that. Listen to the soft sound of your breathing. Feel the slight movement of your body as it breathes. Simply follow your breath patterns until your mind becomes more quiet. Imagine that all of space is filled with the essence of compassion. 1,000 arms of Avalokiteshvara everywhere. You can imagine that compassion as light, or energy, or awareness, or all 3. Rest quietly in that thought. Imagine now that the compassion transforms into sound, and that sound arises in the form of the 6-syllable mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, reverberating everywhere, all around, in a gentle murmur, Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum. The sound of the mantra, sacred mantra, reverberates throughout space, inside you and outside you. As you internally hear and resonate with the sound of the mantra, your own suffering is relieved. It becomes less and less noticeable and continues to diminish. You become filled with light, an expression of your pure nature, your awakened heart, and your wish to benefit all beings. aware of the suffering of others, you choose to radiate this light into space, where the sound of the mantra still pervades. The light of compassion touches all beings and relieves their suffering. Those who are in prisons, those suffering from disease or burdened with psychological pain, those filled with hatred, fear, or greed, those who wish to harm others, those who are tired, hungry, addicted, or painfully discouraged, all those and more. Imagine all forms of suffering are relieved. Quietly take your time to imagine this in detail. Allow yourself to relax into and enjoy the idea of a world in which the suffering has ended through the power of compassion expressed through your meditation. Slowly allow this thought to fill you and notice that peace and happiness pervade you when you think this way. Commit yourself to living in a way that relieves suffering, both your own and that of others. Now, all the light coming from other beings who are also now peaceful and happy, free of suffering, dissolves back into you. Breathe quietly and enjoy this state. Consciously form the aspiration that through your wishes and actions of body, speech, and mind, all beings may become free of suffering. Dedicate yourself and your actions to achieving this goal with patience and diligence. Thank you, everyone. It's so powerful when people join their own hearts together and do such a thing. And thank you, Jetsun Khandro, for collecting this prayer, this meditation. Oh, Anila did that? Oh, thank you, Anila. It's very nice. Beautiful, I thought. Om Mani Padme Hum.
May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anila, for organizing this wonderful thing. And Rinpoche Nambani, thank you.